Okay, we have a very distinguished panel that's here with us this afternoon that we're going to hear from, all about cyber security and, of course, data protection. Now, one of the art of learning is repetition. So we have heard a lot today about cybersecurity from early, and we're going to just put the icing on the cake, so to speak. Now, we know that we collect a lot of data within our schools, and we know how vulnerable, systems can be. At e-learning, we have been deploying a lot of technology. We're going to outfit the labs, as Minister said, and we have started. Some schools, in fact, have already received their laptops. I know Holy Trinity received theirs. Father Clark stepped out. But we want to make sure that the data that you collect within our schools, that data is adequately protected. And of course, you have the necessary systems in place to also allow that logical protection that is required of the data. So let me quickly introduce our panelists. We have a lady among the thorns, among the distinguished gentlemen, right? And Miss Shirley-Ann Eaton, she is a legal counsel, attorney at law, and company secretary of the Mona School of Business. Beside her, we have Mr. Mike Wright. You heard from earlier. He's the Deputy Chief Security Officer at Nelnet, Inc., out of the US. And beside him, we have Dr. Patrick Anglin. Now, Dr. Anglin is the Data Protection Officer at UWI. You would have heard earlier today all about Data Protection Officer. Now, UWI has gone ahead and they have appointed a Data Protection Officer. And he's going to tell us about what that entails in his few minutes. He has to go, so we're going to actually ask him to speak first. Then we have Mr. Gray. He's the Deputy Information Commissioner out of the Office of the Information Commissioner. And he's going to tell us all about what that office entails. And then, of course, we have Mark. We heard from Mark earlier. He's Executive Vice President of FACS, and he's going to put some thoughts around the whole matter of cybersecurity. So we look forward to hearing from each person. I'm going to start with Dr. Anglin because he has to go, and he's going to tell us about who is a data protection officer in considering the Act, the Data Protection Act of 2020, and he's going to tell us what UWI has been doing and then how that can filter into our schools. So I'm going to invite Dr. Anglin to come forward. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good afternoon, colleagues. Might I call you colleagues? I'm not in the high schools, but I've been in education over the last 26 or 27 years. So the University of the West Indies is a multinational organization. So I'm going to give you some history before I tell you what I do. We operate across 26 different physical jurisdictions in 26 different countries. 16 of those countries are in the Caribbean. We have several operations in Jamaica. We have 11 centers in Jamaica. We have 2 large centers, our Mona campus, which is in Papine, and we have a Western Jamaica campus, which is in Montego Bay. But we also have our open campus facilities across many of our parishes. The Data Protection Act in Jamaica not only affects one campus, but it affects our open campus as well. But before we get to the Jamaican operations, I want you to understand what the university is about and how it's structured. So we have 17 contributing territories. These contribute to the budget of the university, up to 50% of our operating costs. These 17 contributing territories form the largest part of our operations. in these 17 countries, or of the 17 countries, we only have 16 physical operations. We don't operate right now in Bermuda. We just left Bermuda a couple of years ago. So we look across the entire spectrum of countries in the Caribbean. That's one. We also have our global centers and institutes, which operates across several other countries throughout the globe. We operate in North America, in Canada, and the US. We operate in Europe, in the UK, as well as Italy. And we also have operations in as far flung as China and in Africa. So we're pretty broad in terms of how we operate. When we heard about data protection, we heard about it from the European side with the general data protection regulations. We heard about those in 2016 when they were passed by the European Commission to take effect in May of 2018. So we had to start doing some research. And that research led us to look at the data protection principles which are enshrined in the Jamaica Data Protection Act. So they're not new. You'll find, though, that they're not coming from IT. They're coming really from the accountants, believe it or not. So we use those principles to develop our policies in the university. And I'm going to take off from what Minister Williams said. And part of it is institutional awareness, which has to be built from the individual first. So what we try to do in the organization is we want to expose the principles, but before we do that, we have to ensure that our stakeholders are aware of what we're talking about. So that's a little history. So what is my job? The DPO for the university oversees our privacy management program, which is the first thing that you must put in as an organization, a privacy management program. What is that? Your privacy management program is really coordinating all the activities which have to do with managing privacy, confidentiality, and parts of information security, all towards complying with the various legislation that faces your organization. So that's the first thing that I do. I oversee our privacy management program across the institution. That's my 4 minutes, I think. But I'm going to continue with your permission. So the privacy management program starts with governance. Who is responsible for, who is the accountable officer for privacy in your organization? Who is that person? You must decide who that person is. Is it going to be the principal? Is it going to be the vice principal? In the university, we have a registrar. Not sure if the high schools have registrars, but some of them do. So who is going to be that accountable officer for privacy? What will the governance look like? What do I mean by governance? What are the issues? What decisions are to be made? Who makes them? And how they're going to be made? Governance. So we're talking about managing the program. Who is responsible for governance? So the third bit is the compliance bit in the organization. That's my job, or a part of my job, is to ensure that the organization complies with what ought to be complied with. Now, I started by saying that we have to make persons aware of what is required. And while we were sitting listening to the minister, Shirley-Ann and I were having a little sidebar, because my experience tells me that most persons don't understand what we mean by data protection. Many persons use the term information security, cybersecurity, in lieu of data protection. They're not synonymous terms. Data protection, and I'm going to give you a quick definition, are the systems and processes implemented to ensure that the privacy rights of individuals are complied with. the privacy rights. In fact, the Universal Declaration, which came out of the United Nations in 1948, as far back as that, spoke about the right to privacy. That's in Article 14. Now, that didn't take legs until about 2004. But what we're recognizing is that that has been enshrined already. So we needn't worry about it. But we need to worry now about internal processes in the organization. What are we going to be putting in place to ensure that those privacy rights are upheld? I can speak to you about the 8 principles and the 6 rights, but I suspect Mr. Wright is going to give you much more than I can. I hope my short spiel at the mic would have enlightened you a little bit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anglin. You can hang on as long as you can. We're going to move to Mr. Gray. Now, Mr. Gray, the Office of Information Commissioner has been established to see to the implementation of the Data Protection Act. Very, very important office, and I know they're in the process of setting up their infrastructure as we speak. I'm going to invite him to tell us about what's going on there, what is going to be the role of the office, how is it that the public is going to interface with his office, and then about compliance and perhaps ensuring that, you know, if there are sanctions, how we're going to deal with those. So let me invite Mr. Gray to address us.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. All protocols observed. The OIC came out of the Data Protection Act, which was passed in 2020. With the passage in 2020, certain sections of the Act have been enacted. And those sections which have been enacted to date basically set up the office. Now, amongst the things that the minister did when he enacted the provision in 2021 was set up a 2-year transition period. The 2-year transition period ends November the 30th, 2023. So the full implementation of the Act will take place December 1, 2023 this year. What does that mean for you and I? Firstly, data protection, as Dr. Anglin indicated to you, is a right already afforded to us. And Ms. Eaton, who is my legal senior, will tell you that it was always there. As a matter of fact, it's one of the charters of fundamental rights, which is the right to privacy. So all that the Data Protection Act has done is bring it to the fore. We always had the privacy rights. The office of itself and the role in which I play, at this stage it's a 23-man operation, pretty small, and it's going to be ramped up shortly. But you have, in terms of the top end, the commissioner and the deputy, of which there's just one, right? And the commissioner operates as the regulator, and the deputy is entrusted to do all other things which the commissioner needs to get done. So the job is any other duty as such as assigned. So what does it mean? First and foremost, the minister introduced some terms to you, and the starting point for any statute is self-understanding. Data controller, that's a term which you need to have in your head. It basically is anybody who processes data. I'm not going to quote verbatim from the statute, but it's anybody who processes data. So the schools are data controllers. Data subjects, a pretty word for persons. They're you and I, right? Then you have personal data, name, address, certain basic characteristics. Then you have sensitive personal data, which is your biometrics, your fingerprint, your religious affiliation, trade union membership. Why do they specify sensitive personal data vis-a-vis personal data? Because the treatment of both are different. All educational institutions, since I'm dealing with the educators, would be categorized as public authorities, and by virtue of them being public authorities, they will have to appoint data protection officers. Dr. Anglin spoke about that. Right? What's the critical thing? And don't worry your head about data protection officers and what does this mean. This particular position is service-wide. It's not specific to any one school. It is every single entity in which the government of Jamaica either owns or has controlling interest in. That's a public authority, and by virtue of that, we'll have to appoint a data protection officer. The modicum of it is going to have to be worked out, because there is no qualifications per se to say this person must be an IT person, this person must be a lawyer, this person must be all manner of things. What is going to be important is the role and function, and the critical thing which the policymakers wrote into the act is that that individual must not be in any conflict of interest in any other role or function in which they are employed. So you know that person is going to be a standalone person, right? So that is critical. What does the office do? The office is the regulator. And without frightening you, there are serious penalties for breaches. The one which is most frightening is the penalty, which can range to as much as 4% of your worldwide turnover. That does not affect educators. Yeah, gross worldwide turnover. So take a company such as Grupo Campari, which is located the entire world. If there is a substantial breach which is not explained, 4% of their worldwide gross turnover could be a fine imposed. Not what is imposed solely in Jamaica, but the aggregate of all their sales worldwide could become the fine imposed. All right? So it's not one of these statutes that you pay minimal attention to. Its bite is far harder than the verbiage. That having been said, there are fine and confine provisions. Fine and confine is criminal, right? So there are those provisions as well. But let's focus on what the whole aim is to do, which is to protect the data that all of us have from unwanted intrusion and malicious use and or misuse, right? To wrap up my few minutes, data security, data protection and cybersecurity, the critical ingredient for the educators is there are 8 standards for processing data. Basically, data must be processed fairly and lawfully. You must only use the data for one purpose. You must, in sharing the data, particularly under the provisions of the Data Protection Act, it must be with a territory that has reciprocal legislation such as ours with data protection. There are several others, but for the purposes of educators, technological advances, Andrew is working through e-learning, but I would say to you in the best way that I can say it, touch upon your IT security provisions. Touch upon your authority levels. Who is entitled to see what, when, how, and why, and for what purpose. And in so doing, I would be saying to you all that the interface that you'd be having with the OIC is basically for public education.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Now we have Miss Eaton ready. She has been looking through her notes. You know, one question I want to ask, where's Mr. Samuda? Is it legal to for lawyers to advertise? I see he has his banner over there. But I'm going to invite Miss Eaton, they can now, okay, to come forward and talk to us about a little bit more about the law itself and the provisions in the law and how that can impact all of us as data persons who basically collect and store data. Ms. Eaton. Yes.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I know it's that time of the afternoon that you probably haven't eaten. All of us suffer from it. No, this is fine. The gentleman covered almost everything I had to say. So what I'm going to do is just mention a few things you omitted. Okay? They mentioned, okay, the three critical terms in the our Data Protection Act. The data controller, which is defined as a person or an institution that is holding or collecting or processing data. And that data controller in our jurisdiction must be registered with our information office, a data protection office. And that person must appoint a data protection officer. That's Patrick. You know, I'm from MSBM. MSBM is a baby of UA. We're a subsidiary of the university. We're the business school. So you're my data protection officer? We're not sure. Then, of course, you have the matter of the data subjects. Data subjects are us. In the case of the schools, that would, of course, be your students, all information on their parents, their guardians, any suppliers, so any contractual relationships you'll have with, for example, suppliers, all of those persons are data subjects. No, the law does say when we're talking about data subjects that they have certain rights. They have the right of access to their personal data to see what you have on them. They have the right to prevent you from processing their data that is likely to cause them any damage or distress. You not hearing me?
No, I hear it.
Yeah, okay, right. They have the right to prevent processing for the purposes of direct marketing, right? Yeah, they have rights in relation also to any automated decision making. If you're using automated systems that are automatically making decisions, they have to be very careful. You have to be very careful in that regard. And they have the right to request rectification of any inaccuracies in the data that you have for them that you're publishing or processing. It's very, 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 very important.
It's a correction.
Yes, rectification of inaccuracies. Correction. They send me correction, yes. Sorry, I just want to make another point. Okay. David mentioned the data protection standards. I think you touched on the important ones for us. I just wanted to mention one other thing. Okay, and enforcement, of course. You mentioned the fine not exceeding 4% of the annual gross worldwide turnover of the body corporate. What he didn't tell you is I have slides for everything. You know how lawyers are. All right, then I'm going to tell them what you do. Okay, they have a lot of power, ladies and gentlemen. All right, let me find out what they do. Here we go. This is my slide. All right. They monitor, the Office of Information Commissioner monitors compliance with the Act, conducts assessments for specified processing, maintains the register of data controllers. No, I think you did mention it, but all data controllers, meaning all our schools, all our institutions, will have to register with the Office of Information Commissioner, as well as notify the Office of Information Commissioner who your data protection officer is. So the Office of Information Commissioner maintains a register of data controllers. They have certain quasi-judicial powers. So they have powers of entry and inspection. They can come into your operation and snoop. Okay. Another thing which we should mention, which is really operational, which Patrick will know, the law actually says that 90 days after the end of your financial year, you have to file with the Office of the Information Commissioner a data protection impact assessment evaluation. Sorry, calendar year. Yes, you know we deal with money and finances. I'm a financial lawyer, really, you know, that's what I do. Yes, the end of every calendar year. I just pointed out some of these things here. I mean, Patrick had mentioned that he and I were talking, and you know, every time I go through these provisions, I started getting very distressed, because it's so often we introduce these things. You have the law itself, the substantive law, then no, you have the operationalizing of the actual provisions. And I was, you know, agonized with Patrick if the ministries or anybody has gone out into the schools to do any of this kind of education. Yeah, because the introduction is December 1st, December 1, 2023. I am distressed for you. Unless persons have been doing it and we're not aware. Well, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop here. I'm not making any promises, but I was telling Patrick, I sat there, and every time I looked at this, you know, if we have to do it ourselves, we're probably going to have to launch a program where we probably try and come to some of the schools. I'm saying it without the permission of the Vice Chancellor or my ED. No, we may have to look at trying to, you know, develop some kind of program, Patrick, to help. But there is quite a bit in here, ladies and gentlemen, and you have to be up and running for December 1st. Okay? December 1st. We may have to, maybe Patrick is saying, maybe we should put on something up at UA and invite everybody. And we'll go through all of this in detail. All right, I don't think the VC or my ED will mind that. Sorry.
No, thanks. Were you finished? You could? Okay, thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause. But I just want to quickly add that I heard the voices, you know, the noise around not being aware. Now, we have recognized that this is an issue, and, you know, we're a country of laws, but we know little about the laws. So this in particular, what we have done at e-learning, we have collaborated, we have started with UTech. In fact, first we started with the Ministry of Education. We did a workshop presentation online that we invited all the schools to participate. It's recorded and we can share it. Then we did a workshop up at UTech. But beyond that, we are going to, in collaboration with UTech, train 50 data protection officers to start. So what that means, and those are going to be drawn from the schools. So we're going to invite our principals to allow, and to select and allow those persons to be trained, and then we're going to have a train-the-trainer approach to some extent. So once those are trained, then they can train others. But it's work in progress. I want to assure our principals that it's going to happen. Okay. All right. Any questions on data protection, because we're going to move into cybersecurity. We know it's late in the afternoon and it's time for you to go, and we don't want to keep you too long. Any questions on the presentations so far?
This is not a question.
Yes, Ms. Baston.
Sorry, so but it's really have to comment. The last presenter, I think, began to hint at it when she said she sat and got a little nervous and overwhelmed at the, imagine how we feel. It's exactly how we feel, because you see, it's one thing is the awareness. I can hear about the attempts to build the awareness. Another whole issue is our capacity. Another whole issue. So when Mark spoke about some of those schools, you know, he has seen and seen. Remember, several of us are like that. We have our facts and our runway, but been fighting for systems administrators that are paid more than a secretary. Been fighting to have somebody with the capability to really do this. So if I think you began to hint at it. It's not so much the awareness building. I believe we can do that. We can send out a memo and tell everybody this is coming. It's capacity, implementation, capacity. And I'm probably thought of as the richest secondary school, and I'm sitting down in my chair wondering how on earth we'll afford to do this.
Thank you, Ms. Baston. Any? You want to? Mr. Robinson, you wanted to say something? Okay.
Nothing more to add to that.
All right, but well noted, and you know, that's something that came up, and the minister is aware. It's a pity she didn't hear your impassioned plea, but she's aware of that. Okay. Dr. Anglin.
Yes, I want to address the comment about capacity, because oftentimes, and we heard it earlier today in some of the other presentations, some of it is really about changing mindset. What we recognize at my institution is that we're doing some of these things already as a part of our general practice. The problem, though, it's not coordinated, and it's not properly codified, it's not properly written down. But also, oftentimes, it's really just becoming aware of what it is you're supposed to be doing. So the technical bits are the technical bits, and there's nothing you can do about that. You need the technical people. But some basic things, something like a clean desk policy. When you get up from your desk to go home, do you leave files open there? These are some basic things that we just don't think about. Is your computer screen open to the public in that somebody can enter your office and read what is there? Do you typically collect more information than you need to collect? And if you collect more information than you need to collect, do you tell the person, the subject, that you're collecting this information, why you're collecting it, and ask them if they can give you permission to do that? So oftentimes these things are not about resources, you know. It's really about awareness and changing how you operate, how you do business. And I think that is what some of the training can do for you. It is not going to provide you magically with a system administrator. You won't get that. You won't get the technical persons. But what it does, it allows you to start recognizing the gap. So one of the first things that we do a data protection audit. Really and truly.
In my office. You need a day in my office.
Well, we do that audit, and that audit starts out with an inventory. What kind of information are you collecting? Who is collecting it? How are they collecting it? How is it being stored? Where is it being stored? And who is responsible for disposing of it? These are some of the things that you have to start thinking about. We're not yet at information security, you know. We're not yet there. And when it comes to information security, there are some different elements, because information security speaks about what we call the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We're not there yet. Where we are now is in terms of operations and ensuring that there is operational awareness across the organization. That's where you are.
So institutional awareness, I took that away from the last presenters as one of the key things, right? Institutional awareness, I think it's something we can all work on. I heard that, I think it's great. My issue is that when you start to tell me about my accountability and the possibility of
Fines.
when you begin to talk about that, I need more than institutional awareness. I need to know that there is somebody who is going to be properly remunerated who can do what you are doing. What you do for UE? Thank you very much. That's
Point well made.
A little technician who fixes laptop.
Yes. I don't think there's any doubt that we need resources to implement this act. Not just at UWI, but in the schools.
Hi, good afternoon, and good afternoon to the panel. Just wondering if anybody, any entity has started to formulate a little package with some of those kinds of questions that we can start relating to. The reason I'm asking is not just a change 1, 2, 3, where you're talking about a whole culture change, a change of 20, 30, 40, 50 years of practice. I'm thinking of a simple thing like the ministry giving us a child's report and saying, please look at this report and see what you can do for this child. That obviously is going to be a violation if it happens that way. I can envision so many violations based on things that we have done. The registrations will have to be changed because on some of the registration forms, we collect data that obviously will be a no-no. So I'm just saying that culture change doesn't take place overnight. And so I'm asking that whichever entity undertakes it, that there be a booklet of sort, I don't know, that you can start putting in the hands of principals so that we can at least start thinking, I use the word, just start thinking about this thing, because it's a whole new ball game as far as I'm concerned.
Sure, point well made, and we're putting things in place. In fact, we're going to collaborate not just with UTEC, but with the schools, and of course some of our principals here would be very much engaged to help us to build out that awareness and to create the collateral that will help to inform.
Not November 30, please.
No. That's why in fact, we're late now, but we're having the dialogue.
Good afternoon to the panel. I know we've been talking about more secondary schools, right? I am from Holy Child Prep School. And while we're talking about the data of students, there are other things that sometimes in the high school we don't take as serious as we do in the prep schools in terms of different challenges that a child has, where it affects even the type of food they consume. And if it happens, what are the implications of that kind of error happening? Not only that, but when that gets out that this is what happens by other persons, a simple thing as a child being there was a situation, not in my school, but a simple thing as a child was allergic to something and the wrong food was given to them and they had a reaction. And it was said, well, we never knew anything about this, but then we don't want anybody to know this because this is something that we don't want for everyone to know. How does this cover all of that when it comes around to private information?
Very good question. Anybody on the panel want to speak to that? Any thoughts, Ms. Eaton?
Okay, remember we're talking about the schools and we're talking about children. They're the data subjects and of course their parents and guardians. Issues like that, there will be confidential issues and health issues. It is incumbent on the school to get permission from the parents or guardians to ensure that the appropriate persons, and the parents should know what persons you're telling, whether it be the cafeteria or the nurse, that, for example, I have I'm allergic to peanuts, you know? So these are why these things become very important in terms of the data you have, the consent you get, to who you can share the data with, etc. And you have a very high duty of care because you're dealing with children. You know, perhaps the highest duty of care of all the occupations.
Thank you very much for that response. We're going to move to cybersecurity. You can put up the next slide, please. We're just going to start with some stats. I know it's late in the day, but we're just going to start with that so we get a feel of what cybersecurity and the issue of cybercrime, involves in terms of, global numbers. So it's a $1 trillion industry. That was in 21. It's projected to be 10 billion by 2025. So, put that in context, and it's broken down. So the world and all the data and the IT infrastructure, they are constantly under attack, and this is really, really serious business. Next slide. I'm going to ask our panelists, but I just wanted to introduce that to us. And here are some stats around what's happening with schools in particular, and this is out of the UK. So the education sector experienced 44% increase in cyber attacks when compared to 2021, with an average of just over 2,000 attacks against organizations every week. I won't go into all the other stats. I'm just going to invite our expert to talk to us a little bit about how our schools can do a better job of protecting our data from cyber criminals.
I can start with that. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I can start with that. One thing that I'd like everyone to take away from today is, let's use an analogy. So I can fill the gas tank in my car. I can change the tires of my car. I can change the oil in my car. That's about all I can do. If I have a more complicated problem with my car, I need to go find an expert. When it comes to data protection, cybersecurity, information security, everybody in this room, everybody in all of the organizations you work with needs some level of basic knowledge and awareness. We don't all need to be experts in anything up. We don't need to understand every single statistic up here. But what we do need to do is some of the basic things that you mentioned, things like if we have a basic level of awareness to like lock our computer when we walk away, to have that clean desk policy that you mentioned, these simple, inexpensive, non-technological related practices, then we can get ourselves to a certain level of protection before we even need to think about spending money or having expensive IT consultants or cybersecurity consultants. Because the gentlelady was right in that when we think about things like the Data Protection Act and regulations, not just here but worldwide, especially the ones that come from the central governments, they're typically one size fits all, right? If you're a large, well-funded institution, it's even though you may be more complex of an organization, it's probably going to be easier for you to comply with those requirements. If you're like a rural, underfunded primary school or something, you may feel like this is going to be much more difficult for you to comply with. But on the flip side, you may have a simpler organization where you can take care of most of these requirements just from using people power instead of technology power.
Thank you. And then we're going to go to Mark for the wrap-up. Any thoughts on what we've said so far, Mark, both in terms of data protection and cybersecurity?
Well, it's certainly late in the day. I guess my only thought is this, without getting embroiled in the dynamics of the DPA and capacity questions. I loved seeing the emotion uncorked a little earlier. We've seen mandates in the past, and we know what that means for us, trying to wrap our minds around that. I remember, you know Hurricane Katrina, yes? You remember that event that hit the southern coast of the United States? There was a whole swath of schools in that zone that refused to digitize their data in the cloud until that event happened, in which it massively violated the integrity of their data, schools flooded and all of that, to shift behavior. So while we're working under a mandate, and that creates a sense of urgency, there is the right thing to do in terms of being proactive. And I think if I were sitting in the chair as an administrator, notwithstanding the deadlines and the threats of financial risk if I don't meet deadline, all of that notwithstanding, I would think about what I can do incrementally, one step at a time. You know, we're a company of, what, 8,000 employees now or so. We go through strict regiments of education. I don't know how many times I've taken PII training for personal identifiable information and security trainings. So it begins like a conversation, and I like some of that. Like, where can we begin? Just pragmatic things that we can do in terms of reminding people about the necessity of changing passwords. The idea that we do put things away and they're locked, that people have access to information on a privileged basis. Just beginning to do some things that move us in the right direction. I said to Mike earlier, it's sort of like closing a gate behind us, and we know that gate's closed, right? So that's one locked away. And we move forward until we can lock the next gate behind us. It's just one step at a time, and we will get there, and it seems overwhelming, but it's the right thing to do is always the right thing to do. This is something that we need to be able to do and should have done to the best of our ability up until this point in time. And it's going to be difficult to do that effectively if you don't have a digitized school and you cannot put in the protocols that protect the data as you should. And to the point that was mentioned earlier about the allergy and the protection of privacy, good technology allows you to do that. And allows people to be notified who should be notified about these things within the system so that you can be alert and avoid fiduciary responsibility that comes with making mistakes. So it's the world we live in. It's not that great sometimes. I mean, this is tough stuff, but it is the world that we live in, and we can be successful, but we've just got to start taking one step. So tomorrow, if I'm walking into my school, I'm thinking, we're going to do one step today. What is that first step? And just start that conversation. And you'd be surprised. People generally understand the necessity of this, but we've just got to be more vigilant about talking about it.
Thanks very much, Mark. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have had a very, spirited discussion and input from our panelists, and we just want to thank them once again. Please give them another round of applause. Where we go from here, obviously, there's a lot of passion about data protection. At e-learning, we're working with the institutions, educational institutions, to help to get this out to our schools, and we're going to work closer with our schools, with our principals to begin with, and we're happy to see so many principals here this afternoon. So we'll continue to work to ensure that you have your data protection officers. We're going to provide a training in terms of who those are. Of course, we'll have to be identified by the schools, and it's work in progress, and that we understand very much. So again, thank you very much, panelists, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to Zed Technologies for putting this on, and we're happy at e-learning to collaborate with you on these initiatives. It's part of our mandate to infuse technology and to bring about greater awareness as it relates to technology. Thank you.